Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kathy Lynch from FSG.
Hello, and welcome to the Shared Value Leadership Summit Day 2. I'm Kathy Lynch, Director of Global Partnerships for the Shared Value Initiative. So I need all of your help with something this morning, because Justin gave us a challenge yesterday. So when I say good morning, I need you to prove that we can be as energetic, even more energetic than day 1. So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. So first, a few logistical announcements. Just a reminder about the Slido app. This is a great way to get your questions in front of our speakers. And you should know that we do even take the unanswered questions and share them with our speakers after the summit. So they have a chance to answer your questions, and we post them on sharedvalue.org. We do have a scheduled change for the day that I want to bring to everyone's attention. When you leave the morning plenary, you should pick up one of these at the registration desk or outside. Okay. All of the content for our afternoon is the same, but we've moved up our timing. Please take note, as we don't want you to miss any of our wonderful afternoon sessions. Our big change is a compressed lunch. As we transition back from the innovation labs, you'll be able to grab a bento box and join us in this ballroom for the afternoon plenaries. Please be back at 1:30 for the start of the plenaries. We want to make sure that you get the best seating for our big finish this afternoon. Okay. Our day will end at 3:20 with our reception, so you'll have plenty of time for networking at the end. I also wanted to thank our sponsors again for their support of this year's summit, with a special thank you to Abbott and Barclays for their sponsorship of our breaks today, and to Arauco for their sponsorship of our afternoon reception. It's truly my pleasure to kick off day 2, and if yesterday was any indication, we're in for some wonderful insights, good conversation, and true inspiration today. I thought I would just share a few of the words and phrases that left an impact on me from yesterday. We thought about strength and fragility, clarity, and the missionary zeal of the entrepreneur, the power of profit. We reflected on the fact that we've been debilitated by the myth that helping society is a cost. We spoke about the power of science and the opportunity for impact, that it's incumbent upon each one of us to take metrics into our own hands. And as we head into our sessions today, I encourage you all to be an impatient optimist, and in the words of our friend Maria Christina, to think about, to think about what's your power, as we all take the leap, as Michael asked us to do yesterday morning. So now it's my pleasure to welcome 2 of our partners to kick off today's summit with their thoughts and reflections on the summit, on shared value, and on their own work. As I welcome Kathy Pickus, Divisional Vice President, Sustainability for Abbott, to join me on stage, I invite you to watch this brief video highlighting Abbott's dairy supply chain initiative.
Savita and her husband Pau Sahab are 2 of the 17 million farmers in India who rely on milk production for income and to sustain their family. Unfortunately, without proper infrastructure, education, and access to markets, it was difficult to produce enough high-quality milk to support themselves. Abbott partnered with Prabhat Dairy and TechnoServe to create a sustainable model that ensures the consistent supply of high-quality milk. Now, farmers have more income to invest in their families and communities, while Abbott has clean milk for our nutrition products.
अच्छा, यापूर्वी डेअरीचा प्रोजेक्ट आमच्याकडे यायच्या आधी माझ्याकडे 3 गाय होत्या आणि दुधाचं कलेक्शन खूप कमी होतं. जेव्हा ॲबटचा आणि प्रभात डेअरीचा हा नवीन प्रोजेक्ट आमच्या गावात आला, त्यानंतर मी गायी वाढवत नेल्या. जिथे माझं कलेक्शन 3 ते 4 लिटर असायचं तर मला पर डे कमीत कमी 40 ते 50 रुपये मिळायचे. आता मला पर डे कमीत कमी 1600 ते 1800 रुपये मिळतात. त्यामुळे मला ह्या प्रोजेक्टचा सगळ्यात जास्त फायदा झाला आणि मी माझ्या परीने
through extensive training and with the creation of 10 new bulk milk chilling centers, more than 1,500 farmers and counting have benefited from this program. One key to success, focusing on women. Because they do the bulk of the dairy farm work, it was crucial they received the same training as men. After 1 year, farmers in the program doubled their income and milk production while meeting Abbott's quality standards, all without increasing costs.
ह्या ट्रेनिंग झाल्यानंतर आम्हाला कळायला लागलं गायांमध्ये कसे म्हणजे काय त्यांच्यामध्ये आपण बदल करायला पाहिजे, दुधाच्या क्वालिटीमध्ये कसं चेंज करायला पाहिजे. आमचा भविष्याचा प्लॅन असा आहे की आम्हाला जवळजवळ 20 ते 30 गाया घ्यायच्या आहेत अजून आणि मोठा फार्म करायचा आहे आमचा आणि दुधाचा पण प्रोजेक्ट आम्ही वाढवायचा विचार करतोय. 200 ते 300 लिटर दूध आम्ही पर डेला घालू हा आमचा विचार आहे दोघांचा पण.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy and Justin, for this great invitation to be here. I'm Kathy Pickus, and I oversee sustainability at Abbott. And I'm reminded of Michael Porter's words from that legendary article that he and Mark Kramer wrote, when he said that when businesses are acting like businesses and not as charities, they can have a far greater impact on social problems. And when I think about the transformation that has taken with those women who have gone from the shadows of the global economy to becoming trusted suppliers to the multinational company, it's a significant impact. And so in the next 3 minutes, I want to share a little bit about how we got there, where our shared value initiatives are headed, and give a little bit of feedback on yesterday's sessions. And I promise not to turn these 3 minutes into 30. But there is a backstory to this. And if you're like me, advocating internally for shared value, you know that it's not easy. But oftentimes, your break comes when a business challenge presents itself. And so a few short years ago, John Janaskal, the head of our global nutrition supply chain, came to us. And he said, look, we have got to source the ingredients for our products to be sold in India from India. He knew that it was cost prohibitive to import milk. It would make the price of our products non-competitive, and plus we had Prime Minister Modi advocating for made in India for India, and we wanted to respect and be a part of that mission. So there are business imperatives that drove that. But as you can see, they were really struggling with the quantity and quality of milk. And he turned to us and he said, look, we need to figure out a way to increase the volume of usable milk so that our business can be successful. And what our team brought to the equation were a number of things. We had strategic partnerships with NGOs. We had capital that we could use to invest in the training of those farmers, as well as the bulk milk chillers that you saw. And we had access to a really great team at FSG. And what we were able to do in the course of a very short year was to solve a business problem. We through that training with TechnoServe, working upstream from our value chain, engaging in where we saw risks to our business, we were able to strengthen those strategies that the farmers had to ensure that we were flushing aflatoxin out of the value chain, making sure that they had access to training in terms of how to store fodder. And they really needed infrastructure. So monies that we typically would spend in philanthropy were directed towards capital expenditures like bulk milk chillers for the business. And it transformed it. We were able to supply enough milk for the business to be able to make the products they needed, and we were able to help them meet their cost for how to run that operation. So we're not stopping there. We've got great news on this program that will really address the demand for scale, which we hope to share with you in the next couple of weeks. But there are also other initiatives that are underway at Abbott that really hit at our shared value strategy. In recent weeks, you may have heard about new developments in the fight against malaria. With the support from the Gates Foundation, PATH, and FIND, our rapid diagnostics team developed a new ultra-sensitive rapid test that can identify malaria in people with no symptoms. This is an important advancement in preventing the transmission of the disease. Through another partnership with the government of Rwanda, we're developing a new model for how to manage diagnostics labs. Through IT investments, management systems, and infrastructure investments, we're really partnering to strengthen the infrastructure of the government of Rwanda's health systems. And one of the first initiatives that this will tackle will be a goal to eradicate hepatitis C in that country. There are an estimated 480,000 cases. In addition, we're starting to be innovative in terms of how we're using technology to deliver blood supplies. Drones are currently being used to make sure that the blood supply is being supported with delivery to rural hospitals at the rate of some 60%. But these are just a few of the initiatives, and we're here to tell you that this takes time, and it takes perseverance, and it takes patience. But to conclude, I want to say that regardless of where you sit within your organization, never underestimate your ability to drive change through shared value. If you hold the trusted relationships with the business, with external stakeholders like NGOs, who, like yourselves, are looking and acting and thinking differently in terms of how to solve challenges in society through business, stay the course. It's possible, and change will come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Gary Cohen, Executive Vice President for Global Health with BD.
Good morning, everyone. And I first want to thank both Kathys for both being named Kathy, because it made it so easy for me to remember both of your names. Some of you may have seen me speak before because we have a long history in BD and shared value creation. It's been a major source of our organic growth over the past 30 years. And in fact, in 1997, working with Jim Collins, the author of Built to Last, we characterized a statement that we called our envisioned future, which was that we sought to become the organization most known for ending unnecessary suffering and death from disease, and in so doing become one of the best performing companies in the world. That was 1997. It was clearly a shared value statement. We've had a methodology for doing this that's been applied to many different initiatives. Starting in 1988, we started to work on improving safety among health workers who could contract disease from a sharp object like a needle. We were the world's largest producer of needles after being used on a patient. HIV and hepatitis could be transmitted that way. That ended up becoming the largest source of organic growth in the company over the last 30 years, and it was clearly a shared value initiative. We supply over $3.5 billion worth of those devices today. We also applied it to strengthening laboratories throughout sub-Saharan Africa to do the testing necessary for rollout of antiretroviral treatment for people living with HIV. We applied it when we were entering China and India, using techniques that we developed on cross-sector collaboration. And China ended up becoming the single largest source of growth for the company earlier in this decade. It's actually now the second largest country in the world for us. And many of those partnerships were with the central government and the Ministry of Health. We're applying it to trying to address and save the lives of mothers and vulnerable newborns in developing countries associated with challenges during childbirth. And today I'm spending most of my time on trying to combat antimicrobial resistance, or superbugs, resistance to antibiotics, which is in fact one of the greatest threats to the health and well-being of the world population. And we're using very similar methods, and the basis of those methods is cluster development and cross-sector collaboration. Cluster development was a term I didn't really understand, even though we were practicing it. It struck me as being very academic, but it means working to create the environment for success, which implies a lot of interaction with external stakeholders. These methods in shared value creation were actually incubated and developed through our philanthropic and CSR work, because that's where we learned how to collaborate across sectors towards common goals. And we were able to transition those into commercial business models. So I'll come back to this theme in a moment, but let's not think that the methodology, the skills that we use in philanthropy and CSR are not highly relevant to shared value creation, because they are. People who come up through those functions are more likely to possess these skills than people who are coming up purely through operational business functions. And it's the integration of those sets of skills that creates the opportunity for shared value creation, and also the basis to establish trusting relationships with governments, non-government organizations, foundations, and civil society. So I can't explain how we did all this in 5 minutes, but there's a wonderful Harvard case study on BD shared value creation and global health that was published last August, which you can easily access. I was asked to make some comments on the content yesterday, and I have to say it was a very impressive day. I agree completely with Professor Porter that engagement of investors and investment funds is a key turning point. And I love the comment, the quote from BlackRock, that without a sense of purpose, no company, either public or private, can achieve its full potential. We can say the same thing about people working in business. Sense of purpose enables us to achieve our full human potential personally and also on behalf of our companies, because it strengthens motivation, and it also strengthens engagement within a workforce. There was a comment made on the need to advance business school curriculum. That's something I've taken some personal responsibility for. Last month, it was announced that I'm co-founding the Rutgers Institute of Corporate Social Innovation with the Rutgers Business School. I'm doing that in part because not everyone can get into Harvard, and Rutgers has, one of the most highly rated MBA programs among public universities. Actually has the highest job placement rate of any MBA program as well. So I'm happy to share information on that. That starts in the fall of this year, and it incorporates CSV, CSR, philanthropy, positive social impact into a formal curriculum in the university. I think everyone here who may work in more social impact functions than, let's say, line business functions, whether it's CSR, public affairs, philanthropy, can certainly play a vital role in shared value creation. I agree it needs to become embedded in the corporations of a company and in the business models, but the stimulus can come from people who understand partnership and collaboration. In fact, it's my experience that small groups of overworked people who have the audacity to take on big challenges and problems, those are the people who change the world. Whether it's small groups of people within a company, they could be intrapreneurs, they could be entrepreneurs, they might be NGOs. I've worked also, I founded a nonprofit in 2009 that's now operating in 24 countries to address sexual violence against girls. The principles for how to do that were coming out of the same type of work I have done within BD, and it is changing the world, and it's a small group of overworked people who are doing it. There's one thing I disagreed with Professor Porter on yesterday, and one thing good about working with professors is you can disagree with them because you're encouraged to debate. It doesn't always work the same way in a company, but with professors you can do that. And he said that shared value is not about doing good. And I think it's absolutely about doing good. He said we shouldn't be ashamed of saying we're doing this to earn a profit, and he's right about that, because profit enables it to go to scale. Similarly, we should not be ashamed of saying we're pursuing shared value creation to do good in the world. Our motives need to be aligned with the intended outcome. In my experience, when motives are not aligned with the outcome, it derails at some point. And if our motive is to accomplish good in society, that actually should be something we're proud of speaking about because it's walking the talk. In my view, doing good is a pathway to advancing the long-term success of a company, because solving social problems creates societal value, which can be then translated into business value. And in fact, some of the world's greatest companies were created by solving societal problems. Think about General Electric and what happened in the early years. Thomas Edison, the problems he was solving, that led to the creation of GE. It's actually not a complicated concept. It's common sense. And doing good is also a pathway for personal fulfillment. My sense is everyone that's here is here in part because you're seeking to accomplish good. It's part of your professional life, perhaps your personal life as well. And I submit it's what you'll remember most when you look back on your career. Even more than your career success, you'll remember the good you did and the relationships you formed as a result of that career. So last thing I want to say is creating shared value is not something, in my view, that will advance like a bullet train. It's not going to be a curve that goes up like this. It's more like a freight train with a big engine fueled by renewable energy. The progress is going to be measured in years, not in days or weeks or months. But like a freight train, it's an unstoppable force. You don't want to get in the way of a freight train because you're not going to slow it down. You're not going to stop it. It's going to keep driving forward. And I think it's a force that will drive success in business, and it's clearly also a force for good. Thank you.
I knew we'd be inspired already. So now, staying with our theme of disruption in the insurance industry, it's my pleasure to introduce our third storyteller of the summit. Please join me in welcoming Dan Baum, Chief Strategy Officer of the Redwoods Group, to the stage.
Good morning. I am grateful to be here with you all today and have the chance to tell our shared value story about how, in a surprising way, not only is this approach really as a business strategy helping us to navigate a disruptive time in our industry, but it's also allowing us to do a lot of good in the meantime. So what I want to do is give you a brief overview of Redwoods, who we are and what we do, tell you a bit about what's going on in the wonderful world of insurance that we live in, and then go deep into a live example of how we're working to provide insurance services to foster care agencies. And in doing so, both create a lot of impact and also find our way through a time where disruption is headed directly towards us. So at Redwoods, we are a mission-driven insurance company, and shared value is really inherent in our DNA. We insure child-serving nonprofits, so YMCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs. And let me see if I can get the clicker to work. It is, there we go. Sorry about that. So we insure child-serving nonprofits, and as their insurer, that gives us what amounts to a treasure trove of data about how kids and how people get hurt in these programs. Every year we analyze over 40,000 incident reports about how people get harmed in these organizations, which we can then use to work with our customers to adjust the way they operate. So while still accomplishing the same impact, they can do so in the safest way possible and reduce the likelihood that someone will be harmed in their care. Through that approach, we've been able to reduce annual average drownings in YMCAs by, let's see, oop. Nope. There we go, 84% year over year. And similarly have been able to reduce incidents of child sexual abuse by 65%. I apologize for the formatting, never make a presentation on a Mac. And that's why we think insurance really can be such a powerful force for positive social change, because it arms us with this data that we can understand how bad things happen and use that to work with our customers to make sure they don't happen in their programs. So we believe insurance can be a powerful force for good, and what we also believe, along with all the consultants and industry insiders, is that insurance is about to get disrupted. If you were to create an industry that was ripe for disruption, it would probably look a lot like insurance. Insurance is big, it's behind the times digitally, and it's a place where customer experience has not been that great. So as a result, there have been billions of dollars invested in insurtech startups as folks line up to do to insurance what iTunes did to record stores, among many other examples. So it's a really interesting time to be in our shoes, and what's been interesting for us as we've looked at this disruptive wave headed our way is that the markets where a shared value approach is essential happen to be the markets where it's really unlikely that they're going to be hit by this initial wave of disruption. Because if you look at these startups, the places they're focused are on larger, high volume, pretty standardized market segments, things like renters insurance, life insurance, coverage for e-commerce sellers. And that makes sense. But if you use a shared value lens to find your place in the industry, it leads you to different kinds of markets. Markets that, because they cover some of our largest social problems, tend to feature customers who are a lot more complex, tend to be a bit smaller, and also bring with them a higher level of risk. So all these things make these markets really challenging, but at the same time, they also make them markets where it's unlikely someone's going to launch a new digital solution. And I think this is a lesson that can apply in any industry, that in a time of transformative change, oftentimes the most challenging markets are the safest place to be. So to give you just one other parallel example, if when Uber launched, you were in the business of providing transportation services to senior centers, you would have had a 5-year window before Uber started running pilots to serve your customers. Because this is a different kind of challenge, right? You've got, you need different vehicles with wheelchair lifts. You got customers who need more time or less comfortable with technology. And Uber had plenty of bigger fish to fry, right? So it buys you this invaluable amount of time to be able to adjust and adapt to the changes in the industry so that you can evolve and be able to succeed in the new reality that develops. And that's what we found to be true about our segments that we're in, providing insurance to youth-serving organizations. And what we think is particularly true of our newest segment, which is providing insurance for foster care agencies. And I want to take you into the world of foster care to give you a sense of the complexity of this work. And I think you'll agree that not only is it unlikely to be the place where someone's going to pilot a new digital insurance solution, but it's also a place where there's a tremendous amount of impact that it's really important that we have. So to introduce you to foster care, I want to ask you to think about childhood, because that's really what we're talking about. Because that's what kids in foster care are experiencing. And I want to ask you to think about the kind of childhood that all of our kids deserve, that we'd want all of our kids to have, one that helps them grow up to become the best version of themselves. Because I think that helps to put in context what the experiences of kids in foster care can be like in the US. And I want to share some of those with you by sharing some real examples from a class action lawsuit that was brought in Texas on behalf of kids in the foster care system there. When we think about, we've jumped ahead to the result of that lawsuit, but when we think about childhood, we might start with parents and family, right? The love and support we'd expect or want all kids to get from them. And it's important to remember that kids in foster care are in the foster care system because for some reason or another, their parents are not able to take care of them. So they start out from this incredibly vulnerable place. And it's important that we meet them there to understand what their experiences can be like from that point forward. When we think about childhood, we'd probably want all kids to have a nice place to call home and have the safety and support that they can always go back to there. And that makes it really hard to even imagine what it would have been like for the young girl in Texas who was moved 45 different times during her time in the foster care system. We'd hope for all kids to have wonderful friendships, to make great memories with their peers. Yet there's story after story in foster care of young kids being placed in dangerous situations with older children who have a history of acting out sexually. And even though we should have known better, are placed into situations where they're sexually abused and leave their time in the foster care system, not with happy memories, but with nightmares. And we'd hope that all kids in their childhood would have adults they can count on. Trusted mentors who come through for them, who are there for them in the moments that matter, which wasn't the case in the heartbreaking way that a young girl had 2 adoption attempts fall through, only because the state took too long to file the appropriate paperwork. So these experiences why the judge in this case concluded that Texas's foster care system is broken. And it has been that way for decades. Because so many kids who entered foster care ended up leaving it in a worse condition than when they started. And while these examples come from Texas, Texas is not the only place where this goes on. This is a challenge all across the country, and when we look at foster care outcomes across the US, we see some really challenging facts. Among the kids who age out of the foster care system in the US, less than 3% of them will go on to graduate from college. 71% of the women who age out of the foster care system in the US will become pregnant by the age of 21. And of the kids who reach 18 and age out of the foster care system, 1 in 5 of them will immediately become homeless because they don't have a safe place to go. So it's clear that we're not doing enough for our kids, especially these kids who are some of our most vulnerable. And I don't stand up here presuming for a second that insurance is some magical solution that is here to fix all this right away. This is a huge challenge, and any solution is going to have to be equally broad. We're going to need better funding for these organizations, to support caseworkers with more manageable caseloads, and to just invest more in families to begin with so there are fewer kids who have to end up going this route. All I'm here to say is that we think that insurance can be a part of the solution, and that this is the kind of challenge where we need all hands on deck working together to create a better future for our kids. And if we can use the data we collect to work with our customers, to make them safer, to make the kids in their care safer when they're in foster care, then we can be a small part of creating this better future for our kids. And if we're able to do that, we will have succeeded in a market where it's going to be safe for us to do where it's going to be safe for us to do that during a time where the industry around us is changing. And I'll just close with this, that for us, this threat of disruption is not why it's important that we do this shared value work. The shared value work is why it's important that we don't get disrupted in the first place. Because these challenges are big and they're not going away anytime soon. So if we want to be about creating better outcomes for kids, then we need to be able to be invested in this work for the long run. And the fact that this shared value model can both bring us to this work that really is worth doing, that it can provide us with the right kind of revenue in this transformative time in our industry so that we can continue doing it for the long run, is a pretty powerful thing. So I apologize for the PowerPoint mishaps, but I'm grateful to have the chance to share that story with you, and looking forward to learning with you more over the course of the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Now it's truly my pleasure to introduce our next leadership dialogue, the roles of the public, private, and financial sectors in creating shared value. We had an opportunity yesterday to discuss the role of the financial sector, impact investing, and activist investors during several of our sessions. We were reminded that within the private sector, the CFO must see the returns provided by the shared value strategy. And Brian Broussard shared with us the disruptive new KPIs that Humana has introduced into the insurance industry. Our conversations continued into the reception and well beyond. We've invited our speaker, Deval Patrick, Managing Director, Double Impact, Bain Capital, and former Governor of Massachusetts, here this morning to continue this dialogue and share with us his perspectives as Managing Director of Bain Capital's Double Impact business, a fund with more than $350 million in committed capital, which invests in companies that deliver both competitive financial returns and meaningful, measurable social and environmental good. But more than that, we invited him here to share his unique perspective as an accomplished lawyer, a business executive, and a public figure as the Governor of Massachusetts. Please join me in welcoming Deval Patrick and our distinguished moderator, Alan Murray, President, Fortune, and Chief Content Officer for Time, Inc., to the stage.
Thank you.
Governor, thank you.
Good morning.
For being here.
Thank you.
And good morning. It's an honor to have you here. Let's start with Double Impact. Tell us what it is.
She just did.
Well, yeah, but you can give us a little color.
So this is the first new business at Bain Capital in a dozen years. It's a $390 million private equity fund. To me, that's a lot of money.
It's grown 40 million since your introduction.
I know. To me, that's a lot of money. At Bain Capital, it's quaint.
Yeah.
You know, it's a charming little fund. It's a fund we launched in the impact investing space to invest in later stage, lower middle market, North American companies for both financial return, and we're underwriting to the same standards as the large cap fund at Bain Capital, and measurable impact in three sort of thematic verticals. And they are sustainability, health and wellness, and what we're describing as community building, and I can get more into that.
Well, we'll go into those in a minute, but you said you were underwriting to the same standards as the large cap funds.
Yep.
Come on. I mean, you really are expected to get the same return as the other investments at
More to
Bain
the point, the
Capital?
LPs are expecting us to. And you know, we've chosen the sectors to invest in with this in mind. You know, impact investing is, I'm sure your guests will know, exists on a spectrum. Some folks are doing this with the perspective of, you know, just getting principal back. Some not even that. Others, a concessionary rate of return. At Bain Capital, some of my colleagues say we don't know how to spell concessionary. You know, we chose a market rate of return not as a value judgment, but because, number one, that's the return that investors in Bain Capital products expect. But also because I think it's important to demonstrate at scale that you don't have to trade return for impact. So there were some things we were interested in that we chose not to invest in because we couldn't generate a private equity style return. So for example, affordable housing, enormously important, but we couldn't see a private equity style return.
But I want to go into detail into some of the specific investments, but before we do that, just go back to this one time. I mean, if your investments are truly able to get the same return that the other funds get,
Yep.
Why do you need double impact?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. Entrepreneurs we've met who are mission-oriented, Because they're fast growing, you're right, they could get capital anywhere. They can attract capital. But sometimes what they tell us, what they have told us in that year of homework we did before we launched, was that they could attract capital that made them feel that when they sold out, they sold on. Or rather, they sold on, they sold out, which is to say, they couldn't find a capital partner who was interested in helping them scale the whole of their enterprise. So for example, we had a marvelous entrepreneur who founded a company called Sundial Brands. Shea Moisture, anybody know that shampoo, sustainable bath and body products? Great story. And they were growing like a weed, 30%, 40% a year. Very intentional about the whole supply chain. They sourced from women's cooperatives in West Africa, and they cut out the middleman because they wanted to be intentional about lifting the living standards of the women at the end of the supply chain, and very intentional about all the stages of the supply chain. And they could attract capital, but they hadn't found anybody who was interested in maintaining or sustaining that mission. And that mission was a part of their brand identification. So they came to us because they had read that I was joining the firm to start this new fund. And in fact, we hadn't even launched the fund. But the folks in the large cap business were interested in this story. And in fact, the size of the check was such that it was more appropriate, frankly, for them. I was on the deal team. We did the deal, and we sold the company to Unilever in December for 4 times what we paid for.
So then, you sticking with the sundial sundial example. I mean, what defines success of double impact? Do you hope to ultimately show the large cap fund that they should be paying attention to other things as well as I mean, 390 million is a lot of money for most of us, but it's, as you said, it's not really that much money.
Yeah.
What's success here?
So first of all, the thesis that there is premium value to a mission-oriented brand is something that our colleagues in the retail vertical in our large cap fund already get. So they're already investing behind that sort of secular trend. I think what we're trying to show in the middle market is this point I made earlier, that you don't have to trade return for impact. And I think that, by the way, as we do, it raises some really important questions for investing generally, to your point. And that's not just within our firm, I think generally. And I guess I'd make the larger point. I'm not sure that this is on the minds of all of my colleagues. This is more a personal point. Short-termism, I think, is a poison. You know, when I was in my business career, this notion of quarter-to-quarter management, I think, has been a real problem. Sometimes I think at the in placing in jeopardy the long-term interests of the enterprise, and I think that same bad habit has crept into the way we govern. We govern from election cycle to election cycle, sometimes news cycle to news cycle, and not generation to generation. And I think that getting back to a sense of long-term value, whether it's in business or in the way we govern, is also at the root of impact investing. It's how we think about all of the consequences of our investment decisions.
Well, sticking with business for a minute, we'll get to government, but sticking with business for a minute, do you think capitalism is in crisis? I mean, you're a Democrat.
Yeah.
Your party came this close to nominating somebody who described himself as a socialist. The most talked about candidate for the next election is a woman who sounds a lot like him.
Who's that?
We'll get to that too.
I see our time is up.
But do you think we face a crisis of capitalism?
Well, I think you talk to a lot of. I talk to a lot of young people coming out of the recession, and I think their confidence in capitalism is shaken. And I say this as a capitalist. You know, I'm not a market fundamentalist. I don't believe markets solve every problem just in time, but I do believe in capitalism, and I think capitalism is an important feature of democracy. But I think that 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 capitalist orthodoxy has been questioned and fairly questioned since the recession, and by an awful lot of young people whose expectations about capitalism were deeply shaken, frankly, by a whole lot of us whose expectation of capitalism were deeply shaken by the recession, where a lot of those bad habits drove us right into a ditch. So I think there are ways in which responsible capitalists are thinking more broadly about this question of long-term value and how you make capitalist decisions, market-oriented decisions that take into account all of these consequences.
I think that's what accounts for the full room you have in front of you right now.
Well, this is my point, right?
And
there are many rooms like this, by the way.
And you hear it more and more from leaders of large companies. And is that ultimately what you're trying to do at Double Impact? Is
well, I
to
think
show capitalism can work to everyone's benefit?
I think we are a part of this movement, if you will. We are a part of this broader conversation. It's a very good thing, a very encouraging thing, and it's a conversation I think that is blooming in lots of different ways. I am, I'm quite confident that we are going to be wildly successful. We closed our number 6 deal on Monday, just the day before yesterday, and we have two more in the short end.
But the trick is not the buying.
No, I get it. I get it. Actually, the trick is deploying right now because everything's so expensive.
Yeah. So, do you want to mention one or two of them? Tell us about one or two of them so we get a sense of what you're doing.
Sure. So we did a deal called Living Earth. So I would just a little preamble.
Yeah.
The deals sort of fall broadly into what I would describe as those that are companies that are inherently impactful, where the business model is by nature impactful, and those where we are trying to manage them toward a more impactful model. So one I would describe as inherently impactful is a company called Living Earth that diverts organic material from organic waste from landfills where it would otherwise break down and turn into greenhouse gas emissions, and recycles it and sells it out as composted soil and mulch. We bought this company. It's the largest of its kind in Texas. We're trying to scale it. We are scaling it in Texas and across the Southeast. You know, the bigger it gets, the more impact. We moved into Tennessee and are moving across the Southeast, as I mentioned. It's ridiculously profitable. You get paid coming in and going out. It's a terrific model. We bought a company in Michigan and northern Indiana, a series of low-cost gyms called Impact Fitness. And it turns out that you probably knew this, the sort of conventional economics of gyms is charge as much as possible and hope nobody comes. And this is the inverse. It's charge $10 a month and drive
really
utilization.
Get them there. Yeah.
Right. And this is a model that targets so-called fitness deserts, so places where there are high degrees of obesity, type 2 diabetes, driving utilization, starting to measure numbers of times a week people get their heart rates up, sharing that with their healthcare providers to drive down insurance premiums and so forth.
So how do you, as somebody who has worked in government, worked in nonprofits, and worked in the private sector, how do you think about the role of each of those in addressing these kinds of social problems?
So we talked about this a little bit before coming on today, and I think about this a lot. I will say I think the sectors are, sort of jealously defend their respective prerogatives when there is so much more power in the collaboration among and between the sectors. Lauren will remember anybody here from Massachusetts? Some of you here from Massachusetts?
You got quite a crew. And did you vote for governor?
No, don't.
Just checking.
We're all one today. We had so 15 minutes after I took office, the bottom fell out of the global economy. And we had to think hard about what the strategy was to try to climb out of that hole. And one of the strategies was, one of the job creation strategies was something we called the Life Sciences Initiative. And we looked around at all of these natural resources we had, and one clear one was brain power, right? There are 300 colleges, universities, research institutions, teaching hospitals within 45 minutes of downtown Boston. It's a ridiculous concentration of brain power. But mostly they don't talk to, or hadn't talked to each other. We had a biotech industry, but it was kind of loose and independent and Boston-like, kind of, you know, this is ours, and we don't talk to each other. And so we got some of the industry participants, some of the university folks, the hospitals, academics together, and we talked about this and how we would, what were the gaps, how could we start to promote this thing, how could we start to collaborate, what were others doing. California had announced a $4 or $5 billion initiative, what was happening outside the country, and how could we knit this thing together and take it to a whole other level. Today, Massachusetts is the undisputed global destination for the biotech industry, and it was one of the industries that pulled us out of recession ahead of most of the rest of the nation. That was a collaboration. Government didn't do that by itself. It was a 10-year initiative. It was $1 billion of government money plugging little holes that industry told us strategically made sense. You know, little bits of money, valley of death kind of thing for worthy companies or infrastructure needs for particular companies, but a lot of, you know, promotion. So that kind of thing where we're doing stuff together, that's high impact stuff. It happens in education as well.
But I ask that because I think part of what drives a lot of the companies that are here in the room today to move further in this direction is a sense that government, at least at the federal level, isn't doing very well at addressing infrastructure, at addressing healthcare, at addressing the training challenge, at addressing the environment, any number of these issues. And what I hear from a lot of business leaders is it's not just that shared value makes for a better company, but they feel like they have to step up because somebody's got to do it. And well, Michael Porter wrote an interesting piece in Fortune last year with Catherine Gell, where he said, our biggest economic problem is our political problem. The system isn't working. How do you feel about that?
Well, we definitely don't have enough time for how I feel about that. I mean, he's right that the moment presents a particular vacuum for business to step up. But the moment, you know, there will be a time when government starts to function better.
You sure about that?
No, I'm hopeful about that. Yes. And I hope that when that time comes, that better means a more collaborative government. But I hope it does not mean a return to a point that a place I used to feel where government or philanthropy lets business off the hook. In other words, I hope that business continues to step up, and that government functioning again means government collaborating. I think the greatest power I felt I had in my old job was the convening power, right? Most people would come to the table, including people who don't talk to each other outside of the governor's office.
We got a lot of questions coming in. I want to take those questions, but let me just take this one point further, because I spent most of my career in Washington, have watched this for a number of decades, feel very strongly that, you know, every year I think it can't get worse, and every year it does get worse, and we're seeing the parties go further and further apart. This was Michael Porter's point. He said it's actually, from a competitive analysis, what is developing is a duopoly. It works for the parties. They get to raise a lot of money, drive a lot of excitement. It doesn't work for the customer, the citizen. But I don't see anything changing the direction, the bifurcation, the increasing polarization of the public. What's going to make it change?
Well, Michael, and I think in that article had some help diagnose the problem. I think I'm right in remembering the article. I mean, some of it is money.
Yeah.
Some of it is the gerrymandering.
Yep.
Some of it is the voter suppression. And we did this to ourselves. We did this to ourselves. You know, in a democracy, you get the government you deserve. Make no mistake about it, right? We made this. We made this. And so the sooner we stop talking about how it happened to us somehow, and start taking some responsibility for it, the better we will be. So we have it within our power. Well, we have it within our power to create a democracy agenda, right? And I think it ought to address transparency and indeed limits on money in government. And it's not that people ought not have a voice, but it's a thing that keeps a lot of really good people from getting in. It's just daunting. We ought to have a more balanced approach. I'm not talking about keeping politics out of politics, but we ought to have a more balanced approach to how we draw the lines for representation. What's the line today that now representatives choose their voters, not the voters choosing their representatives? And we ought to deal with the fact that many jurisdictions are making it harder, intentionally harder, rather than easier for voters to cast their vote, and that is wrong. And when we start to do that, it'll open up, and it should open up, and it will be more competitive.
Let's thank you for that. Let's take some of these questions. First one is, what types of investors are interested in double impact? Where are you getting your LPs?
Yeah, so they're all anonymous. They say anonymous. I would love to be able to look at whoever's asking that question, but I guess you don't want to be called out. So it's the sort of typical range of types of investors, meaning public and private pensions, high net worth individuals, those sorts. I will say it was funny. When the conversation first started about my coming in to do this, it was because there were investors in other Bain Capital funds who had expressed interest in this.
Interesting.
Mostly from Europe, by the way, where the impact investing is more mature. At least it was then. And so when we after this year of homework and study and talking to everybody, we went to those investors to say, we're ready with our business plan. How about you want to come in? And they said, this is perfect. Here's $100 million. And we said, well, wait, that's too much. And they said, it's $100 million or zero. These are huge institutions. And we said, well, we're starting small. And they said, well, we don't do small. So we had to go introduce ourselves to a whole other group of investors who were willing to do smaller size checks.
Family office type
Family
investors.
offices and so forth.
That may be one of the problems in this sector, right? Is that there are people willing to deploy capital, but they're deploying it at such a scale that it's hard to do the kinds of things you want to do.
Yes, that is right. And also, first funds and all that sort of thing. And there are 15 of us on this team, 14 who are full-time on the team, 14 of whom are experienced private equity investors. And folks wanted to see the team all together and all that. So in a way, we sort of we can see ourselves to a second fund that is huge, but we had to introduce ourselves to a first fund.
But it's interesting, when I talk to CEOs who are moving their companies in this shared value direction, I always ask them why. Mm-hmm. And the answer I get most often, well, many of them will say it's a personal passion, but then the next answer is my employees. Mm-hmm. I have to do this because my employees want me to do it, and we're in a battle for talent, and if I don't do it, I'm not going to be able to get the best people. More recently, occasionally you hear customers.
Yep.
They almost always say that the investors are the last, the slowest to jump on the bandwagon. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's changing?
Well, an investment fund is different than an operating company, I think, in that respect. I mean, look, we are a source of pride within the firm, we are inundated with resumes. We are a little bit of a problem, I would say, within the firm, in the sense that folks want to transfer.
Good people want to move to you.
Yeah, they want to transfer, and so that's a little disruptive. It doesn't bother me, but it bothers some of my, some of my colleagues. No, but it's good. It's good, and and we collaborate. So things come into us. The check size is too big. We bring them to other divisions in the firm. We work on stuff together and co-invest together.
So how do you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion when you're making investments? Is that a core value?
Well, so I will say that maybe not in the way the question is. Yes is the answer, but maybe not in the way the question is asked. So we do not have as a thematic vertical the race or ethnicity or the gender of the entrepreneur as a factor. There are funds that do, but we haven't. In the community building vertical, which is more of a place-based strategy, where we're investing or in search of companies who are creating jobs and catalyzing economic activity in places of chronic underemployment, the entrepreneurs have overweighted racial and ethnic minorities or women, and we haven't invested yet behind those entrepreneurs. We have some that are further along in the diligence than others, but we don't have a result yet.
So this next question, we kind of danced around a little while ago, but let's see if we can take it on more directly. Double impact investing is one arm of Bain. Why isn't it the whole portfolio? Why isn't this what all the Bain investors are doing?
Well, meaning why isn't the whole?
It's the concept of shared value, that it should not only be a financial return, but have some demonstrable value to society.
I think that's a fair question. First of all, we have to do CSR reporting fund-wide. All of the LPs are requiring that of all of the funds. That's a new requirement, by the way, in the last 18 months, I would say. And the largest investors, again, starting in Europe, starting outside the United States, have required that of all of the funds, starting with the large cap fund. We have to report that, as I say, firm-wide. I think that in time, the notion of full consequence investing, which is the way one of our LPs describes what they do, will be the norm. I think we're going to have to prove it at scale. And as I say, that's part of our mission.
That's part of what you're doing.
But I think we're going to have to have proof points. That there isn't a trade. And as I say, at least in the retail group already, they are investing behind this thesis that because of secular trends, consumers are making choices to associate around mission-oriented brands right now. That there's a premium in the market for such brands. They are already in this same mind space. They already use the same language.
You can maybe pull them a little further.
We're already drafting behind them. We'll see this, I think.
Or pulling them in your draft.
Exactly.
Endless impact opportunities in emerging markets. Why a U.S. focus? These people want you to do a lot.
No, yeah, I know. I know. Well, so we started, as I say, like the amount of money seems like a lot to me, but we started small because we wanted to nail the model before we scaled. We started in North America because the team is new. We are active investors. We're not, here's the check and we'll see you at board meetings. We want to be very involved, and because we're new, we want to be together and become a team before we fan out. And we're all in Boston, and New York. So we wanted to be relatively close to our investments. So we thought we'll start in North America. It's pretty easy to get around. Among the questions for Fund 2 is what the geographic footprint should be. And so, and the firm has offices in many parts of the world. So it's conceivable that we may expand our geographic footprint. There's a lot to like about and a lot to do in emerging markets. I'm particularly tempted around Latin America and Africa. But before we go big, we want to make sure that this team feels like a team and is working like a team, and that felt like we needed to really be in one place and close.
A good question here about the economy. We're at kind of a peak. It's been, it's now the second longest expansion on record. Unemployment is down below 4%. So it's a strong moment. What happens when the inevitable bust sets in? How is that going to affect impact investing? How is it going to affect double impact?
I don't know. I don't.
That's all right. But no one else does either, but they still say something.
Everybody asks those questions. Nobody knows. You tell me. Who asked that question? You tell
Anonymous.
me. I mean, it's I understand the curiosity around that question. I wish I had some wisdom about it. I guess I would say that in a lot of the places that we are investing, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's boom time. We are really, really interested in some of the, I hate to use this term, but we're investing in sort of second and third cities, places where it doesn't, it just doesn't feel like New York or the Bay Area or Boston or what have you, but where there are really great things happening and really terrific companies, and frankly, where we can see an exit after a reasonable hold period. I think if you think about the question before about emerging markets, do they see a boom time? So I get it. I mean, I suppose in some ways you'd want to be investing, you want to be buying, you want to be sort of economically cold about it. You want to be buying then. You have capital and holding and building then, and then ready to sell when prices start to go up again. But economies boom and bust. I ain't worried about that.
Should business be acting to support the democracy agenda, and if so, is there a shared value approach? I'm not sure I completely understand that question, but we talked about the crisis in capitalism. There's also a crisis in democracy. And what's the role of business in addressing that?
So if the question is about what I described as the democracy agenda, I guess I would love to have business support. I mean, I just outlined what I think, in very loose terms, what I think the democracy agenda ought to be. I think everybody ought to support it. This is a serious problem. Democracy is up for grabs, and we can decide. There's a friend of mine who says we've been treating our democracy for a long time as if it would tolerate limitless abuse without breaking. And it turns out we could break it. And I think it's all hands on deck.
So it's a really interesting question, because when I was growing up, people thought of the Republican Party as the party of business, and the Democratic Party more as the party of labor. We've gone to a completely different place. I would argue that the last election was the first election where neither candidate was really carrying the agenda of business. And now with this polarization that we're talking about, you often find that business leaders are the most pragmatic, one might even say the most progressive on issues like human rights. Look at what happened in North Carolina when Bank of America and all the other companies stepped in and said, you can't do this, limit access by transgenders to public bathrooms. Look at what's happening with companies like Delta and the NRA. Business now sort of finds itself in the middle of this increasing polarization. What's the appropriate role for them to play in healing the breach?
You know, I was talking with my friend Ken Frazier from Merck.
It's a great example. Yeah.
About his experience after Charlottesville on the and his.
Just talk about what he did. I think most people probably know, but
so Ken Frazier is the CEO of Merck, and he was. I don't think did he chair the President's Manufacturing Council?
He
was on the President's Manufacturing Council, and after Charlottesville and the President's comments about Charlottesville, he resigned, and he explained his decision to resign as being in protest of the President's equating the grievances of the white supremacists with the protests of the counter protests, I guess, of the and that led to the dismantling of the Manufacturing Council. And I was talking to him about what the conversation was behind the scenes with his board.
yeah.
And he said, and I've known Ken since we were both GCs. He was GC at Merck and I was GC at Coca-Cola. And he said, you know, that conversation, his public comments weren't kind of out of the blue. This is, you know, he'd had a relationship with his board a long time. And obviously he talked with his board before he made his public comments. They knew him, he knew them. And the way I put it is, and we were doing this sort of thing at an HBS reunion event a few weeks ago and talking about this. And the way I put the question is, you know, how did you come to a place where you were comfortable bringing your whole self to your role as CEO? Yeah. And so he began to talk about that. And he said, you know, I've been at this job a long time. I've been CEO for, you know, a dozen years. I've been general counsel for, 10 years before that. They knew me as more than the hired help. I delivered, right? I've been good at my job. And they understood they understood my backstory. And he said, and he also said, we are at a point where more and more business leadership is having to step up.
Bingo, yeah.
And fill a void in the civic space, not the political, in the civic space. By the way, that's a very old-fashioned idea, isn't it? Right? It's a very old-fashioned idea in a way.
And you can find companies like SC Johnson that have kind of always operated like this. Right. But it's as somebody who's covered business for the last 4 decades, it's a very big change. I mean, you look at what Ken Frazier did in that occasion. You look at what Ed Bastian at Delta did in cutting off NRA discounts. I mean, come on, he runs an airline. Right. Why is he getting himself? Yeah. You look at what Brian Moynihan at Bank of America did on the transgender access.
Right.
Those are
and
things.
And public companies versus SC Johnson.
Those are big public companies. Right. I can tell you 10 years ago, the response of those CEOs would have been, transgender bathrooms? Are you kidding me? Right. I'm a banker. I'm going to keep my head down and not talk to anybody about this. So something very different is going on today.
And so on the question that was asked about the democracy agenda, I would say even different from the sort of social issues where I think that leadership has been inspired, but I can understand that it's controversial. The question around the democracy agenda, to me, is about citizenship, and that seems to me everybody has a stake in. That to me is not a partisan question. That's a citizenship question. I think, as I say, everybody's got a stake in that.
So we only have a minute left, and somebody has asked the question in a veiled way, but I'm going to ask it in an explicit way. There's some very important people out there who think you should run for president in 2020, and are urging you to. Looks like you got some votes right here. So how are you?
Okay, now I really see our time is up.
No, you got 49 seconds here. How are you thinking about that?
That clock is wrong. I am. Thank you for that.
That's why I'm here.
Yep. So I have a job. and I'm enjoying it enormously. I am now that the fund is raised and the team is in place and we're doing good deals. I'm going to try to have within bounds some public voice. I'm going to try to get involved in the midterms where I'm invited and where I can be helpful with candidates who have more of this sense of sort of service leadership or servant leadership, not the hyper partisan, but I mean, I'm a Democrat. I'm a proud. I'm not the sort of Democrat who thinks you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. But I do think it's such a worrisome time, and I think, as I said, I do think that democracy is in jeopardy, and I think we need a different kind of courage in our leadership than we see. And I think there's some marvelous new leaders stepping up, and some of them have asked for help, and if I can help, I want to help.
So you're thinking about it.
I'm thinking about that.
But you're thinking about, could you Justin, roll the clock back a few minutes? I'm not quite done.
Thank you, everybody. It's good to be with you.
Thank you for that wonderful and very inspiring conversation. I'm very excited to introduce our next panel, Innovation, Sustainability, and People, a value chain approach to the built environment and communities. This is a fascinating example of the power of the shared value ecosystem. The built environment ecosystem brings together several powerful drivers. People, issues like population health, community health, workforce and employment issues. Sustainability, environmental drivers, such as clean energy, water savings, global warming, floods, hurricanes, etc., that have so greatly impacted our urban infrastructure around the world. And innovation, technological drivers. We now have smart lights, smart water meters, bricks that breathe, windows that adjust to the seasons, and of course, as we learned about yesterday, artificial intelligence. Our panelists today offer us a window into this dynamic shared value opportunity. Please join me in welcoming Beirne Fallon, Global Head of Corporate Affairs for Hilton Worldwide, Richard Kennedy, President and CEO of Skanska USA, and Maxwell Young, Vice President of Marketing Communications for 100 Resilient Cities. Please join me on stage.
Thanks, Kathy. So we have on stage two very exciting panelists. We have Katie Fallon and Richard Kennedy. Richard Kennedy is the president and CEO of Skanska USA, where he's been since 2004, and in that time has played key roles in landing and building a broad range of projects, including the UN headquarters, renovation, the World Trade Center Transit Hub, and the new Terminal B at LaGuardia, for which all the frequent travelers in this room, thank you.
Thank God.
Don't blame me for the traffic, please.
He's helped grow the company into one of the largest and most respected construction and development companies in the US, with revenues of almost $7 billion. Katie Fallon is the global head of corporate affairs for Hilton, meaning she's responsible for managing the company's communications, government relations, and corporate responsibility efforts. Before that, she served as the senior advisor and director of legislative affairs for President Obama, and as the president's chief liaison to Congress. Before the White House, she was staff director for the Senate Democratic Policy and Communication Center, led by Senator Chuck Schumer, where she was also my boss. In their personal lives, both Richard and Katie are deeply committed to the social good, serving on the boards of numerous charities and receiving awards for their work. Finally, I'm Max Young, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for 100 Resilient Cities, an organization created by the Rockefeller Foundation, dedicated to making cities more resilient to the social, economic, and physical challenges of the 21st century. I'm particularly excited to be here because my organization has a deep commitment to enabling shared value on the part of our nearly 100 private sector partners. As we've heard a number of times during the last couple of days, 100 Resilient Cities believes that in order to truly make cities in the world better in both good times and bad for all of their citizens, companies need to be able to see a business case for doing so. A great deal of our work is dedicated to trying to create a market for products that city leaders, both in government and out, can use. And it's particularly good to be here with these two panelists because the companies they represent have such a huge impact on the fabric of cities, both through the hundreds of thousands of people they employ and through the actual physical characteristics of the complexes they design, build, and run. I've seen firsthand how thoughtful stewardship of these complexes impact those who live and work on and around them. And this is not just about how buildings are constructed, about green standards, but about the entire placement of the building within the community, its footprints, and its impact on place, people, and the economy. These two influential companies are prime examples of how different industries can have an immense impact on social challenges in the shared value space, while also improving operational efficiency and enhancing their innovation, competitiveness, and success. So using that as a frame for this conversation, let me start with a simple question for you both. How does your company think about shared value, and what are some of the key initiatives you're engaging in this field? Katie, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Max, and thank you all for having me here this morning. Welcome to the Conrad at Hilton Hotel. And Max was prepping me for this panel yesterday, and as he can vouch, in the middle of the conversation, one of my colleagues burst through the door who has been researching our archives because we're celebrating our 100th birthday next May, and we're really excited about that. But as part of the archival research, my colleague learned yesterday that we invented the martini. So I think that is one of our biggest shared value contributions.
We'll have to have one in honor of shared value. Yeah.
So, but in all seriousness, Hilton is part of the fastest growing employment sectors in the world, travel and tourism. It represents about 10.4% of global GDP, and every one of five new jobs created is going and being employed in our sector. And so that creates a great opportunity for us as a business as part of this industry, and as a result, we're growing rapidly. We open about a hotel a day, and when we open a hotel, we have to bring the community along with us. It's a months to years long journey, and once the hotel opens, we hope to be there for a lifetime. So we do that by recruiting and retaining local talent, investing and buying locally. But I want to focus on the recruiting and retaining local talent part because this is a massive business opportunity for us, or challenge for us. So given how much volume we have to hire on a day-to-day basis, and given that that is against a backdrop of a global youth unemployment crisis, we are trying to use our employment engine as a way to solve a grave societal challenge, but also meet our very immediate business needs. So we created a corporate responsibility program that was derived from this business need called Open Doors Commitment in 2014. And we committed to preparing, mentoring, and training 1 million young people around the world for a hospitality career by 2019. And today we're over 800,000 towards that goal. But we've learned in that process that there's a pretty serious skills gap in a lot of the countries where we're developing and opening hotels. So we've had to go above and beyond that commitment and actually create a digital training module for soft skills that's regionalized in some of the countries, particularly the frontier countries where we're operating, and we call that Passport to Success. And in the last couple of years, we've partnered with the International Youth Foundation to roll that out. And we've seen both our employment and our retention rates rise dramatically for those hard to employ youth, particularly in the countries where we're developing hotels for the first time. So I think that is our strongest example of shared value in the sense that you've asked about, and a program and an initiative that has no end in sight for us as the global age of travel continues.
And this is particularly interesting because it's not just it's not an environmentally focused program. This is a way of getting further back in the value chain and really impacting the people who live in the community.
Exactly. It has more relevance to our HR efforts than to our corporate responsibility efforts, but corporate responsibility has had to take up the mantle to meet that business need.
Thanks, Katie. Richard?
Yeah, hi, good morning. So just a bit about Skanska. Skanska is a publicly traded company on the Stockholm Stock Exchange. We operate in about 11 countries. We have about 42,000 employees globally. Here in the US, about 9,000 employees. Like many other companies, we like to describe ourselves as a value-based company. We have 4 core values. We say care for life. We care about people's safety on our job sites. That's a really big thing for a construction and development company. We care for the environment, the communities in which we work and operate, the ground on which we actually build our projects. We like to partner with people. We have a value we call Be Better Together. We commit to our customers, and we act ethically and transparently. It's sort of a ground-up values that all of us share in the company. And on the back of that, when it comes to shared values and creating profit from that, we have our corporate slogan, if you will. I don't like the word slogan, but we say our focus is profit with purpose. We can't have a business unless we make money, but we want to have a company that does good things for our society, and these two things go together. On the back of those values and that approach to business, we have a sustainability agenda, and it's focused really around our core business. It's not to do good for the world. It's good for our business, which then does good things in our society. Safety, ethics, green, sustainable building, community investment. We operate in cities all over the world, and it's important that we're tied into our communities and we invest in them and we're part of them. And diversity and inclusion, the governor mentioned that earlier in the last panel. That's a critical thing for us. For me, I'm a big advocate for inclusion in our company, and the original approach to that was around diversity, bringing in people, gender equity, ethnic equity in our company. It's a traditionally male-dominated white industry, construction. And so we started this diversity program years ago. Inclusion started to creep in, and I really grabbed onto that as a critical component of it. It's not about, and I would say to people who it started as a socially minded effort, but I would very clear to people that from my perspective, it's not about, I'd say this isn't about saving society, it's about good business. I wanted to ground everything around inclusion into good business, because fundamentally that's just about people understanding each other, communicating with each other, when they bring their perspectives and the best of themselves. I've heard that today to the table. We have the best communication we can have, we generate the best ideas, and it's all good for the bottom line. I mean, as a company, we try to approach shared value from that perspective. So it feels very natural to me. Our green efforts, for example, making buildings green, less energy or more energy efficient, that's about reducing mechanical systems in buildings and lowering the price to deliver better, more cost-effective solution to our clients. So for me, the core of our business ties in very well with things that are good for our society.
And so you've been at the company since 2004. Can you talk a little bit about how the commitment to shared value has evolved and changed in response to market forces and customer demand, if it has?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I joined the company, we have a saying in safety in Skanska, we're on a journey to zero. We want to have 0 accidents, 0 incidents on all our projects. 42,000 people in our company working with an immense supply chain. We have hundreds of thousands of people working on any given day on a construction and development project around the world, in our operations. Getting to 0 incidents in safety is an incredibly difficult challenge. But we say it's a journey to that, and I feel the same way about this area. Community investment. We talked about this a little bit before. Every day here in New York, it's normal for me to get a request from some charity to donate, to buy a table, to participate in this, to support some societal cause. Since I've been with the company over the past 15 years, I've seen us move from a more reactionary approach to that, sort of, okay, they're asking us to participate, we'll participate, to taking a more strategic view of it and how we can help change society by looking at the issues that are facing the communities in which we're operating and really use our competencies as a company to tackle them. In Sweden, for example, we have Bokluk, which is a low-cost quality housing initiative. That was built purely to build profitable business around low-cost housing, but it was there to drive a need. Here in New York, minority and women business enterprises, it's a big societal need that we have. We've created a building blocks program. It does social good, but it's good for us to create a more stable supply chain for us as a business. It's those sorts of things. We've just moved from being philanthropic to more strategic philanthropy, if you will, but it ties right back into our profitability as a business. So.
Yeah, and that's so important because it's hard to overstate how much of an impact your company has on the fabric of, we mentioned 3 giant projects just in this city alone, and that can be replicated across the world. And so by being strategic about those projects, you can have this massive impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Katie, a similar question. You had mentioned that social responsibility has grabbed the mantle of some of these things and driven them. Have you found that that's changed a little bit over the last, you've been at the company for 2 years, almost 17 months, that's changed a little bit as this movement has gained momentum?
So I think we're lucky as a company, as a 100-year-old company, in that our founder, and some of you in the room that have heard me speak on this before have heard me say this, but our founder, Conrad Hilton, 100 years ago, sort of set out to launch the first hospitality company based off of, quote unquote, a divine mission to spread international peace through travel and tourism. So that purpose, that mission has been in our DNA for nearly a century. So a lot of our what we would call what we would label corporate responsibility initiatives today have just organically grown out of the business because of that legacy and that heritage. And I'll give you an idea. I'll give you an example, sorry. We have a proprietary software we use across all of our hotels, 5,300 hotels around the world, called Lightstay, that was developed as an operational tool for our hotel operators to create efficiencies across water, energy, and waste. And that was not designed as a corporate responsibility program. Of course, our corporate responsibility team, we put a lot of stock in helping to ensure that that story gets told outside of the business, because since the inception of that program, which is a brand standard across our hotels, we've been able to save our hotel operators and owners $1 billion in savings across those 3 categories. But in the process, we've reduced our overall carbon emissions by 24% across the globe, which is hugely significant. So this is a program that was built and arose from business needs to create operational efficiencies that now we're driving externally and sharing that technology outside of our industry in the hopes that other people can adopt these best practices across big campuses or global footprints like Hilton's.
So that's a great example of corporate leadership, and you both represent companies that are leaders in your field. Can you talk a little bit about how you're driving this change in mindset towards shared value and not just responding to consumer demand, but trying to induce it and incite it? This is a good example. I don't know if there are others.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's very timely for us, because one of the things we're realizing is that millennial travelers are becoming more a bigger portion of the pie of travelers. They have different demands of businesses. They make consumer purchase decisions based off of the values that the brand espouses and whether or not it's consistent with theirs. And our customers are no different. We pulse check them every month or so. And the last time we did a customer survey, 86% of Hilton guests said that our environmental and social impact mattered to them in their purchase decisions, and would matter even more in 12 months from now. But then we realized that we don't really share what we're doing behind the scenes of a hotel with our guests, or invite them to participate in that mission with us. So there's a new technology that we rolled out a couple months ago called Connected Room, which will be at every Hilton hotel in a couple of years, which connects your smartphone to your room when you enter the room. Everything from lighting, heating, air conditioning, your entertainment preferences will sync up to your smartphone, and then you yourself, as a guest, will be able to track your own environmental footprint. And we can even share with you through that app what your social impact is by staying at that hotel. So there's a lot of potential there to bring the customers along on this journey with us, and I think that is going to be add value for both sides of that consumer equation.
Richard, how is Skanska?
I have a question. Can I drive my Spotify through
Yes.
in my room? I just pictured myself dancing in my Hilton hotel.
Yeah, music too. I should have music.
Cool.
What's on
that was my
what's
imagination.
on that list?
Oh, a lot.
You can even
It's
have
very
your
eclectic
family
list.
photographs,
Yeah,
Richard,
yeah.
pop up on the screen.
Yeah, see, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So from my perspective, I mean, Skanska is a big company. We're very local. Construction company is by nature a local company, development company. We live and work and breathe in the cities and communities in which we build. And one of the questions that we had, obviously we prepare for these things somewhat. One of the questions was, how do you change consumer behavior? And my thought about that was, we don't change consumer behavior, I don't think, in our company. We're a service provider, clients like Hilton and other large companies that build for their portfolios. And what we try to do is influence them with the competencies that we have in the company and the experiences that we've developed in the company focused on this area. Again, we have these values that lead to a sustainability agenda that drives our focus. Where are we going to play in this space? What type of clients are we going to look for, to work with, so that we can, as Governor Patrick said, have a value-based feeling about what we're doing and a purpose to what we're doing. And so part of the challenge we have as an industry is we are driven by cost and schedule guarantees, which I'm sure the same you, right? Every quarter, again, as Governor Patrick said, I have to show up and I have to deliver numbers. And how I do that is, obviously within my purview to some extent, but it depends on the external market. The reality is, at least in the US, I think we see more of this in our Nordic operations, the demand for green buildings, deep green buildings and technologies that are highly energy efficient are less in the US. But we put our resources and our competencies in places where we can, and we try to develop experiences around that, and then we try to bring that to our clients and try to influence their decision, get in early when we can have the most positive impact. And you just see, I forget who said it, was Gary, I think it was a freight train. It kind of feels like that. It just continues to build momentum. It's not incredibly fast, but it's incredibly powerful. And that's the way I see us using the platform that we have, strung out all over Europe and the US, building projects everywhere to try to influence the process as best we can and create shared value.
So what is that freight train going to encounter? What are you excited about over the next year or 2 years in this space?
I tell you, I'll put myself as an example. I'm a lawyer by training, construction development executive by profession. The fact that I'm sitting on the stage, I'm not an expert in green, I'm not an expert in sustainability, but we have those people in our company, and I've become more and more acquainted with this because it's becoming more and more a core part of our business. What I like about it on a personal level is I feel drawn to it personally. I feel like I'm doing good things. The fact that I'm sitting here today talking about this, the fact that I talk to clients about developing workforce in our communities, it's fantastic. It makes me feel good about being at Skanska, being at work every day, and I think I see that momentum building, and that's really exciting to me.
Katie, how many employees does Hilton have?
We have 380,000 globally.
So that's a huge community. How do you incorporate those 380,000 employees into this process of shared value? How do you bring them to the table on this?
So, like I said, I have it sort of easy because it's in our, I think, cultural DNA as a company, and it's not difficult for me to try to bring along the team with us. In fact, we have each hotel operates as its own small business or its own player in the community. And each hotel has its own philanthropic or volunteer ecosystem around it that's really designed by the team members that work there and the general manager that runs that property. So what we try to do is aggregate all the good work that we're doing across all 5,300 hotels to tell a global story about our impact. But really, it's these bespoke initiatives that are coming from our team members in each community that are driving our philanthropic spirit outside the walls of our properties. This Conrad that we're sitting in, for example, partners with the Friends of Hudson River Park, and the team members on their free time go and volunteer in the park to do restorations and cleanups. The chef has a garden on the roof where he grows fruits and vegetables for the restaurant, and team members volunteer to help him in the garden. This hotel is one of 2,000 Hilton hotels that takes all of your partially used soap, recycles it, repurposes it, and sends it to developing countries where they have high rates of hygiene-related illnesses. The team members take great pride in that, particularly a lot of the housekeepers who are know that soap is going back to their home countries and saving lives. And in fact, since we started that soap recycling partnership with Clean the World in 2014, the death rates of children under the age of 5 in the recipient countries has been reduced by 35%. And they know that they're having that impact, and it makes them feel like they're part of something bigger than their 9-to-5 job.
So I'm glad that you mentioned impact and gave a statistic, because it'd be interesting to know, I think, for everyone in this audience, how you measure impact across all of your programs and all of your shared value initiatives. I don't know, Richard, if you can share a little bit about that.
I think that's one of the challenges that we face. So I said before, there's great momentum around this. Measuring the impact of this is difficult, right? I can show up every quarter, business people in here, you have to, quarterly results, what's profit, what are your operating expenses, where are you on pure financials? How you measure the impact of this in terms of bottom line results is not clear to me yet. Green projects, they put out the same bottom line as the other projects, but there's no way to say this, because of this, it yielded that. The impact that we have on our communities or in inclusion things. And Governor Patrick mentioned proof of scale. I think that's the place where if we can focus as government, business, NGOs, how we work together to develop the proof points around this. That is going to be key, because that's what drives business. As philanthropic or as socially minded as any boardroom can be, it's still the bottom line. Mm-hmm. You have to be focused on that. If you're not going to be in business.
You mentioned scale, which I think is so important in both businesses, because if you find something that works in one community or one building, you can scale it up to thousands of locations around the world, tens of thousands of locations around the world. Does your board and do your leadership recognize that opportunity, and are they supportive of you all in the shared value initiatives and CR? This is an audience question, by the way, so whoever asked it.
Well, I think I'm one of the more frequent executive committee members in front of our board, and it's because they want to hear more about what we're doing in the shared value space and how we're connecting it to the guest experience. And that's, I think, for them, they're seeing the future of this millennial traveler dynamic, where we're going to have to be more visible in our behind-the-scenes efforts to create greater loyalty and have more connections with those millennial travelers. So it's very high in mind for them. The good thing about us for measuring ROI across the environmental work that we're doing is that we have had this, system-wide network data collection and measurement network in place through Light Stay. So every month we're able to calibrate how much we're saving across the portfolio, and we're able to communicate to the owners what that means for them in terms of their bottom line. So that's a very helpful tool that we use for the ROI measurement.
I think the Light Stay example is particularly important, because not only are you measuring the impact of each guest, but you're then sharing that with the guests and using that as a way to entice them back.
Yeah, that's the next step in the journey, is to make sure that to empower the guests to know what the role that they're playing in that endeavor through Connected Room.
So you both work for very global companies. Our next audience question is about how the interest in shared value in the built environment differ by geographic region across Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Africa.
I can give a short answer. I mean, it really is. It's different not only between Europe, our operations in the Nordics. They're very focused on sustainability in the Nordics. So I think I'm very proud to be part of a Swedish company because they lead in that area. And when you move over to the U.S., it depends on the jurisdiction. I'll tell you that our operations, are in Texas are less focused on sustainability than our operations in the Pacific Northwest. So what we try to do, and you mentioned it, and I think it's absolutely right. You have these general managers of the local properties. They need to cater to the local demand, and then you can use the power and platform of a large company to find those things, draw upon good practices from one place or another and bring them to other locations. That's how we just try to use that. It's decentralized with a singular platform that you can draw from to bring to your local markets.
So that's a really interesting example. Can you talk a little bit more about the tension between, for example, the Pacific Northwest and your Texas operations, and how, as both a national and global company, you address those?
Well, they have fist fights all the time.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
I'm just kidding. No,
who wins?
There's let them decide. No, just kidding. There's really no tension between them. They're in different markets. Where the tension arises, in my experience, is when we come together as a leadership team in the U.S. and we have costs, we have overhead. Where are we going to put our money? Where are we going to invest our company's resources to drive the business strategically? For the Pacific Northwest, great focus on sustainable projects. We do a lot of great work up there. It may not be the overhead that we put into sustainability, for example, may not be so appealing to the folks in Texas, for example. I'm not giving Texas a hard time. It's just a reality that it's got a different approach to this issue than the Pacific Northwest. That's where, for me, these proof points become so important. I said before, strategic philanthropy, and as I thought about it a little more, it's really it's strategic investment in these things. We have to start proving. I have to prove to my business leaders out there in the market that the money that I working with the executive leadership, decide to deploy for these things actually is good for their bottom line. And once they believe that, then they will harness it in their local markets, and that's how that freight train just gets more and more steam behind it.
Katie, this question mentions Airbnb, so I presume it's for you. How will you use shared value to drive competitive advantage, not just operational efficiencies? And how do you use it to market against disruptors like Airbnb?
So we don't set out to use it to market against disruptors, to use our corporate responsibility shared value platform to market against disruptors. But I do think we have natural advantages in differentiating due to our massive geographical footprint and how all those 380,000 team members and all those 5,300 hotels sort of enroll in the central vision of our culture and purpose across the world. So it's like, I like to call it, because of my former life, it's like having a massive campaign infrastructure where everyone's very proud to be with the Hilton family, and as part of the Hilton family, they have certain obligation to their community that they have to live out to perform well in our company, to align with our core strategic objectives. And I do think that gives us a great advantage to rally our scale and scope around a global mission. And it's, I think, a lot more difficult for disaggregated platform type companies to have that overarching network effect that really resonates in the communities. So it's a great question, and if we were in the hallway talking privately, I'd probably answer with a little more edge.
Yeah, Airbnb.
We pay taxes, for example.
There you go.
Yeah. But
do you find that you and your company spend time debating whether an initiative qualifies as shared value? You had mentioned that light stay was something that came out of the business side that CR grabbed on because you realized it's both media and corporate responsibility impact. Do you find that's typically how it goes? Is there a debate over whether something counts? You can check a box.
Do you want me to take that? No, I think that I think it feels odd at a company like Hilton that for 100 years has always sort of looked out for the communities that it operates in. I think it's more odd for them to have a distinct corporate responsibility function because everyone takes it just naturally to be a part of their core business function. So we're very blessed in that regard. We rarely have to go in and make a case for why our business partners should be adopting our vision or our version of CR programming around the world. It comes the other way. It comes grassroots from the hotels, and we say, oh, we would like to bundle this into our platform, which we call Travel with Purpose, and use it as a mobilizing force for our culture, but also to share best practices across the hotels, because we are the central convening of those ideas for the business.
Richard?
Yeah, I exactly like you. It's core to our business. What's great about the concept of shared values, it gives us a better way to talk about it, I think, and to connect with other businesses, the ecosystem that we talk about. I just think it's a good common language to use, more than changing the way we're thinking. It's just tapping into what's now becoming a stronger movement, I think. It's great.
Great, thanks. So I think we're out of time. I don't have time to ask either of you if you're running for president. So I guess that will wait for
please don't ask.
For the next panel.
But I will be launching the Deval Patrick Pack today.
All right, we made a deal here. That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Before I introduce our last speaker for the morning session, I want to thank all of you for your attention and staying with us and staying so energized and focused. We really appreciate it. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our final speaker for this morning, Lindsay Levin, founding partner of Leaders Quest, a social enterprise firm that develops wise, compassionate, and adept leaders, people who are capable of changing, disrupting environments with competing priorities and interconnected challenges. That certainly sounds like us, doesn't it? So please join me in welcoming Lindsay to the stage, and Lindsay will then transition us to our innovation labs.
Well, thank you very much for that welcome. It's wonderful to be here in a room full of people over the last 2 days who, in different ways, are creating so much positive change in the world. A real privilege. And to listen to so many powerful stories of what it is that you're doing in your businesses and your communities. Now, before we move into the breakout sessions, I want to just take a couple of minutes to think with you about what is it deep down that inspires us to do this kind of work? What is it that makes us willing to step up in a very complex world to work that on the one hand can sound quite simple but is actually very challenging to do? And how might we inspire many more people, many more colleagues to step up in this way and be part of a shared value journey? 17 years ago, in 2001, I was an entrepreneur in the UK. I'd founded a number of businesses, I'd had my fair share of successes and failures, and I was at a point in my life when I was deeply asking myself a lot of questions about purpose. Really, why was I here? Really, what was I here to do? And how might I take this quest for purpose and embed it in a new startup, whatever it was I was going to do next? And at about that time, as I was asking all these questions, a friend of mine invited me to go on a trip to Ethiopia, to spend some time there with communities that were really struggling, very marginalized, in extreme poverty in some parts of the country. And so off I set to Ethiopia. I spent 10 days up on a very high plateau in an area where about 250,000 people lived, where they were struggling with irrigation projects in an area of extreme drought. And these were people eking out a living. They had nowhere else to go, eking out a living in a situation where it was very, very hard to grow the food they needed, and they were stuck really in a cycle of repeated famine. So I spent time with those communities, meeting with their leaders. And then end of the trip came, and I found myself back in the city of Addis Ababa, getting ready to go. And on my last day, I went out to visit a slum on the edge of the city. And as I was standing there talking to some of the community, I caught sight of a woman who was crouched down on the ground before a fire outside of her little shack home. She was kind of separate from the rest of the community, and beside her, bundled up in a cloth, she had a small child wrapped up. And I said to my translator, I'd like to go over and see if we can speak with that woman. And so we walked across and asked the lady if she would speak with us, and she said yes, and we sat down on the ground to speak. And she started to tell me a little bit about her story. She described her 8-year-old son who was in school. She was very proud that he was in school. She was very proud that he was not working to support the family but was getting an education. And she told me about her daughter, who was this child wrapped in a bundle beside her, who'd been born with cerebral palsy. When the daughter 4 years ago had arrived, her husband found he just couldn't cope. And so overnight he left home. She'd not seen him since. And so here she was, making a living as best she could with these 2 children. She took me inside her home, no furniture, a pile of raggedy clothes on the floor that was the family wardrobe, and also the mattress. And as we came back outside and we sat back in the sun, I found myself completely lost for words. It was like there was this big yawning gap between us, and at the same time, there was no gap at all. I was sitting looking at a woman with whom I shared so much. And in that moment, I knew that I was part of Hasia's world. Her name was Hasia, part of Hasia's world, and that she was part of mine. I was part of her dignity and her grace and her drive to give her children opportunity. At the time, I had 3 small children. That was part of what was racing through my mind as I listened to her. But I was also part of the neighbors who shunned her and the community that had left her behind. And I felt in that moment what I can best describe as a mixture of shame and of deep connection, and somehow a huge appreciation for the gift of life. So I came home, and a couple of months later, I founded my next startup. Leaders Quest, it's the organization I've led for the last 17 years. It was a new business model, a value proposition based on the idea that for business leaders like me, like you, to step up and help build a different future, sometimes we need a wake-up call. A reminder that we're part of something actually much bigger than ourselves, and that's an incredible opportunity as well as a responsibility. So we began creating experiential programs all over the world. Today we work in 25 different countries. And they're programs designed to do three things in a very short space of time. The first is to explore different perspectives, especially in a polarized world. We've been talking a little bit about that this morning, especially when we appear not to agree with one another, especially when we don't easily understand each other, to explore different perspectives, to recognize that the way that I see the world is only one point of view, and there's a lot of other valuable points of view out there. So what does that look like in practice? Well, for example, a couple of weeks ago, traveling to rural West Virginia with a group of Silicon Valley leaders to meet, amongst others, with miners there, to see what does the world look like through the eyes of these miners. To stay in a small town, in a motel, where the internet doesn't flow like water, and where the town is actually a food desert. And where many people really don't see any prospects for future jobs when their mine closes or automates. And asking, how do communities like this, how can they be included in these wonderful new economies that we're creating? What does growth look like here? And what might our role be in that? So different perspectives. The second thing is about giving people the opportunity to see the humanity of one another. What happened to me in Ethiopia? So taking a group of executives, for example, to China to meet with migrant workers working in a shoe factory with 20,000 employees, or a computer laptop factory with 40,000 people. Understanding what the young people there, where these workers come from, what do they aspire to, what's meaningful to them. And then tracing, in my case, the invisible thread between a young woman on the factory floor working a 12-second cycle time as part of the manufacturing process, and the laptop, the very same laptop model that I was carrying in my bag. Having a conversation with her about our families, putting a human face to that story. And the third thing is about what all of you do. It's about showing people abundant possibilities. It's about going out into the field, meeting people like yourselves, meeting your colleagues, seeing the businesses that you've created, seeing the opportunities that you've made, understanding how people think differently and innovatively about new products, new services, new markets. What does that take? And in particular, the personal and collective leadership and courage that's required, as well as the innovation and the strategy. We live in an amazing world, an awesome world, full of opportunity, sometimes very messy, complicated, moving very fast. And often, as we've heard today, we have the solutions that we're looking for. Much of the technology we need to address the kind of social and environmental challenges that we have, it's all sitting there. It's right in front of our noses. And in my experience, what very often gets in the way of making this stuff happen, and it's what you all deal with every day, of making this stuff happen, of building scale, of taking that Bain Capital example and applying it across the whole business rather than just one part of it, what often stands in the way is us, is people. Our fear of change and disruption, a sense of scarcity rather than abundance, the feeling that if we share something, maybe there'll be less for us. Being overwhelmed by complexity and by the pace of change and struggling to really step forward in that situation. And above all, this lack of connection, or you could call it empathy or compassion for other people, and actually also for ourselves, for what it is to be human. So you're all on this wonderful shared value path, and that's why you're here in this room. It's why for me it's such a pleasure to be with you. One of the leadership challenges I think that we face together is how we keep remaking that connection for ourselves with our shared humanity. And above all, how we encourage and help our colleagues and people perhaps who are not yet on this journey to step forward in the same way. In my experience, there are people in companies all over the world who are kind of buried, who are yearning for a sense of meaning. We heard about the CVs, resumes, people wanting, maybe this happens for you, people want to come and join the project, yearning for a sense of meaning. Oftentimes, it takes getting some of our senior leaders out into the field, you do this, showing them, connecting with the human rationale, thinking about what's the story I want to tell my children, or my nieces or nephews or neighbors about what it is I do. Getting that human connection in order to catalyze the kind of change we want to see, in order to get people up and running in a way that they might not otherwise do, because it's a huge, huge motivator. So I encourage you in your work to be impatiently optimistic, as somebody said yesterday, or stubbornly optimistic, as we often say. We've got this extraordinary richness, this extraordinary diversity, there's so many extraordinary opportunities out there in the world around us. And for me, the business of how we show up, of the attitude we bring, the mindset we bring, the openness that we have to new ideas, this kind of deep personal work, this is the essence of leadership in a world where we're trying to create more shared value. And how we energize ourselves around that, the few moments that we take each day, the way we get up in the morning in order to go and make a difference. That nurturing of ourselves. One of the things we talk about in our work is love. Not always easy in a boardroom, but I love to do so. And it starts actually with taking care of ourselves. Because especially if you live in a world where you're out there trying to make positive change happen, busy people, huge amount on our plate. So there's a certain self-nurture. There's a reconnecting to the reasons that we do this kind of work that is hugely valuable in then being able to have yet more impact. So I thank you very much for welcoming me today. I thank you for the fabulous work that you're all doing in the world, and I wish you the very best of luck with that. We're now going to move into a 15-minute break, and I think it's going to come up on the slide there. You've chosen in advance groups to join. One of the groups, my Organization Leaders Quest, is running. We look forward to seeing some of you there. Wish you a great break and a wonderful continuation of the day. Thank you.